You've got a different hat on today.
I have. Yes, I've been involved this morning with the press conference launching with bestforbritain.org. And this basically is the first major MRP polling. So it's like a snapshot today where they are saying if there was an election now with the new boundaries for constituencies, which will take place, I believe, next month, what would happen? And this form of MRP, I should hasten to add, is very sophisticated. So rather than saying, oh, there are 2,000 people and it's demographically about right and then multiplying it out through the country, they take people like, oh, James O'Brien, okay, a typical James O'Brien, and they form a profile for a typical James O'Brien. Dare I describe him? No. Yeah. And then they would take one for someone like me in her 60s, single parent, owns her own house, that kind of thing. Then they would take one for a plumber or a chippy or whatever and say, has his own business or her own business, drives a van, and they have these profiles for many thousands of not typical people, but so they just categorise as much as they can, and then they take polls for what those people would vote at any particular time, and then they map that onto a constituency using the census and all sorts of other data. So it becomes very accurate.
Do
you see what I mean?
Yes, I do. So you get a clearer constituency-specific picture
of
what is likely to happen based on demographics.
Yes.
Do you know what it stands for?
What, MRP?
Yeah.
Well, it's got a lot of syllables in it.
It's a big one. It's like your countdown days, this. It's multi-level regression and post-stratification. I just looked it up. It's fantastic,
very clever
isn't it?
being able to read it out, frankly, Mr. James O'Brien. But so that is the kind of statistical analysis behind it. So there was wonderful Naomi from Best for Britain, Professor John Curtis, who we see obviously mainly on the BBC, but on lots of channels, talking about, particularly on election night, and a wonderful guy called Luke Trill, whose company does a lot of focus groups. I don't know if you're familiar with him.
Yes, I am. I know as well.
And he describes the qualitative stuff. So what are groups of people thinking about? And I've got some great descriptions. I've took lots of notes of what are they thinking about Sunak, Starmer and so on, and why they're voting this way. But fundamentally, the results that would come in if there were, obviously there isn't a general election, very sadly, and if it was done today, the best version of this would give Labour a 140-seat majority with 470 seats. I hasten to add this is for England, Scotland, Wales, not Northern Ireland. And the Conservatives would win 129 seats, still far too many, in my opinion. But when you look at, then they can take out Reform. If Reform UK stood back in Conservative marginals, that changes because there's a big assumption that if you're going to vote Reform, you would, and they weren't there, you would then vote Conservative.
Well, that's the party that Farage was leading last time round, isn't it?
Effectively.
So they did withdraw from Conservative.
Exactly. Yeah. So if they stood back, that shows in this polling, in this statistical polling, that Labour could drop to around 400 seats, and the Conservatives will go up to about 200 seats. So the biggest block of voters was Labour at 35%, Conservative 23%. I know, who are these people? Yeah. And the don't knows are the third biggest block at 12%.
Okay.
So if you then assumed that a lot of those, because a lot of the don't knows were Conservative voters, if you assume they go back, then you start to get into tricky territory when you combine that with Reform standing down as well. So those two things, the undecided all go to Tory and Reform stand down, you could then be in a hung parliament scenario, still with Labour having more seats than the Conservatives, but it would be a hung parliament territory. So that was fundamentally what they were talking about. But it was a sort of, what are people thinking? This is what Luke was.
I'll just mention, this is the modelling, the MRP
modelling.
modelling. It was the one that got 2017 bang on, including the shocks in places like Kensington and Canterbury, which I didn't understand at the time. But now you've explained the constituency-specific nature of the work. That's how they could know in 2017 that Kensington was going to surprise everybody.
Absolutely. And in 2019, they got it within one seat.
It's incredible, isn't it?
So it is incredible. So it is, as far as analysis can go and projection can go, it's very, very important. And Naomi from Best for Britain said in 2019, she said to the Liberals, don't go with this. Just don't go and say, let's have another election, because this is what's going to happen. And they ignored it. Anyway, we know what happened after that. So it's very interesting. They were talking about, Luke from More in Common was talking about the focus groups. And fundamentally, they say that the Labour support is large, but it is falling in these marginal constituencies. From about 6 months ago. It's large, but it's soft.
Yes.
And what they mean by that is that these aren't people who are saying, I'm going to vote Labour, I'm definitely going to vote Labour. They're saying, I'll probably vote Labour, but actually I want to see something more. He found that, and you'll know this on a daily basis, a lot of people have utter exhaustion with politics, absolute exhaustion. The phrases that keep coming up are, Britain has stopped working, broken Britain, it's chaos, shambles. And everybody this time around, Luke was saying, has a personal story.
Right.
So in terms of the issues that matter, it's not stop the boat, 75, three-quarters of people, it's cost of living. So it's when you're talking about energy bills, when you're talking about inflation, and inflation is different for everyone depending on what most of your money goes out on spending. Then it was NHS. Everybody, in terms of support for the strikes, everybody more or less supported the nurses, not necessarily train drivers, and so on. That's split. And immigration, concerns about that, it was only 28%. Still high, but not
considerably lower than in previous
right-wing
years.
media would have you believe by any stretch.
This is fascinating stuff.
Partygate was a big issue. So this is where it's a personal story. Can't get a GP appointment. Everybody knows that. If you say ambulance waiting times, we're not all of us have to call an ambulance.
Of course.
Obviously, critically important,
but
not
not
denigrating
day-to-day experience.
But it's not, we all generally have to ring up the GP at some point or other in a year. It was cost of living, people saying things like, we can't go on days out with the kids anymore. We can't do those things, as well as, all of the others who are very, very, very worried about
It's so
pay
interesting,
and so
because
on.
none of this is reflected in most political journalism at the moment.
Well,
it
isn't. It isn't.
as
I
you
did have a
point
go
out,
about that,
Did
by
you?
the way.
I'm not
Yes, I
surprised,
did.
because you're right. The stop
So,
the boat stuff and some of the
it
other
really
rhetoric,
isn't.
just doesn't speak to people who can't get a GP appointment or who are worried about not being able to take the kids out for the day during the holidays.
Absolutely. So when they came to Sunak,
Yes.
this is the way he's described. He is less unpopular than the Conservative Party.
I like that. That's lovely, isn't it? Talk about damning with faint praise.
When he's next on his lectern, when he has his little things, his little stickers on the
less
front, he's
unpopular
saying,
than the rest
I
of you
am
lot."
less unpopular than the rest of my party.
Because it's relative. So he is unpopular, but the party itself is even more unpopular than he is, which is a win for him. It just is.
But the popularity of the Conservative Party is down from 55 to 23%. So, I'm going back to 2019.
Gosh.
So a lot of things that people are saying are, well, he's not really strong enough. Why can't he stand up to Johnson? A lot of people call him Little Rishi.
Oh, really?
Little Rishi can't stand up to people.
They
hate the non-dom.
Do they?
That obviously with his wife
of course.
choosing non-dom tax status to avoid paying £20 million. Don't start me on that one. £20 million to HMRC, which he still hasn't offered to pay back. Anyway, not illegal.
No, absolutely
but
not illegal.
morally
and not him.
bankrupt.
It's his,
Absolutely.
it is his wife, of course.
But people have...
That's landed.
A
lot of this stuff that you're talking about, I keep reading and hearing Conservative MPs telling me that people don't care. The country's moved on from Partygate. No one cares about his wife's financial affairs. That's really interesting, isn't it?
Absolutely a big one.
So this is all despite right-wing media coverage. It's actually despite of it, not alongside it or because of it, but this is despite being constantly told the world.
Because we all know it. You know, I have this phrase, you know what you know. And you do, and you know when you're being lied to. And the vast majority, look at the local election results, the vast majority of people know that there's something not right. They know they're being lied to, no matter whether they read the Daily Mail or not. Yeah. But the Conservative base, he said, was split. So you have effectively the red wall, which they describe as loyal nationals.
Right.
And with the red wall, they struggle with Sunak. They find it difficult to deal with his wealth.
Yeah, that's interesting.
The swimming pool story was significant. And they would then, they would be
was
like...
it really?
Sorry?
That swimming pool story was...
Yes.
I'm really interested in the stuff that's getting traction.
Absolutely. It's fascinating, isn't it?
Yes, it really is.
Because it goes against what I think people in London, and it's not against London, but people in London think, they look internally into Westminster. I don't live in London. I choose not to live in London. I grew up North Wales, lived in Leeds for many years, live in Bristol now. I have lived in London. But it's very different out there. It's a different world.
Yes.
So then they also have the blue wall,
right?
Which he described as more Cameronite.
Yeah.
Types, They didn't like Boris Johnson, but they quite like Rishi Sunak because they're quite liberal, so they quite like him. But fundamentally, the message is Labour have got to get their act together, and also if Sunak's rating falls, then the Tory party fall with him.
Yes.
So they really do need him. And then you come on to Starmer, and people go, oh, they're judging him against Tony Blair. Absolutely not. They're judging him against Jeremy Corbyn.
That's a win for him.
That's a win, exactly. But his description was, he's a bit meh.
Yeah, I knew you were going to say that word.
Yeah.
But partly from the shape of your mouth as you prepared to say it. Because it's quite, but
He's a bit like...
So as they say my mum would say, it's neither now nor summit.
Yeah, so they're not like against him. They said he's competent, and this is the critical thing, but does he have the answers? So bearing in mind, the phrases "capped in hindsight" and so on have stuck.
They have.
Yeah, absolutely. The whole Jimmy Savile stuff, well, I'm not saying he did, but the question saying, well, didn't he let, this sort of
This is why Johnson did it. I mean, it's completely
didn't he let
dishonest.
him off, didn't he, and all of
that.
And they're cynical that any of the stuff that the Conservatives are saying, they're very cynical that any of it's going to work. Even those who vote Tory don't believe that what they're telling us, halve, I can't remember what the 5 are now, halve inflation.
Bring down the waiting
Stop
lists.
the boats.
Stop the boats. There's a couple of others. I can't remember. This is amazing stuff.
Stop the boats.
Where can people find out more about it?
So if you go on to Best for Britain, all spelt out. I'm just going to have to get the website up. Hang on here. bestforbritain.org, O-R-G, and then it would be on there.
It's amazing. I know that finally, just for my own, Luke Trill was asked about what people thought about Suella Braverman. Did you take any notes about that? Let's just do that in conclusion.
He said she would effectively be the longest suicide note in history.
For the Tory party.
For the Tory party, exactly. So it's open season in the Conservative Party at the moment.
It's fascinating because the membership like her. It's like Truss all over again. Yeah. The membership like her, but the country absolutely doesn't. No. But of course, if there isn't, you get to be Prime Minister if the membership like you, unless there's a general election. This is amazing stuff.
And one of the things, if we've time, that I was there talking about...
We haven't really, but seeing as it's you.
Tactical voting.
Right.
So the stopthetories.vote, which I was supporting for the local elections, we had 500,000 people visit that website.
Yeah, it's incredible
within the last 4 days before the local elections. And I honestly believe that tactical voting will be...
Could make a massive difference. Well, those 12% of undecided lopsided as well. If you combine the two, then it's all to play for. Carole Vorderman, what a pleasure. Lots of people delighting in this this career. What is it? A career augmentation.
I don't know what it is.
No,
really.
it's about this new avenue.
It's just an angry old bird from North Wales, basically, getting very cross about how we are.
And as you say, the detail of the polling is absolutely staggering.
Yes, it is.
Engrossing. We'll see you soon.
Yeah, you will.
Thank you so much. If you want more of Carole Vorderman and with occasional interruptions from me, I'd refer you to our recent Full Disclosure interview, which has been one of the most popular of the year.